Welcome everyone to this webinar sponsored by Ontario Retirement Communities Association. I'm Dr. Alan Power, and I'm the Schlegel Chair in Aging and Dementia Innovation at the Schlegel University of Waterloo Research Institute for Aging, based in Waterloo, Ontario. This is a webinar on supporting residents with dementia through the COVID-19 pandemic, and I will be joined by a panel of advocates and experts who will be helping us with what I hope will be a very rich discussion. I'd like to thank Jess and Trina and Aaron, the folks at ORCA, for putting together this important webinar on very short notice, and we are very happy to be participating with you. In addition, with our discussion, we will have Kyrié Carpenter, who is a dementia coach, Brian LaBlanc, who's an advocate living with Alzheimer's, and Karen Stobbe, an engagement specialist who is the co-founder of In the Moment. And they will all talk about their roles, I think, when we get into our discussion. I'd like to start by just giving a brief outline. What I'd like to do is just speak for a few minutes up front, give a review of some general guidelines. Now, most of these the organizations have read. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I would like to just point out a couple of areas that may tie into the best ways to support people living with dementia and some potential trouble areas. And then some of my thoughts about what we should do when someone in our community tests positive for the first time and subsequently. And then we are going to expand into how do we help people who are living with a diagnosis of dementia who are affected by the coronavirus. And we'll have a general panel discussion for the rest of our time. So some suggested guidelines. First of all, nothing we're saying here is meant to be exhaustive. The details are going to vary among different communities. It will have to do with your geography, what's happening in your community, what your building looks like, what your staffing levels are, all those different things that are unique to your organization. I would recommend that for general preparedness, you start with ORCA's COVID-19 response guide and the attached organizational checklist, because these are really well constructed and well thought out documents to help guide you, as well as obviously any Ontario provincial guidelines that you need to follow for retirement communities. The COVID response guide also has a lot of excellent educational signage. They can be printed off, or links to great signage, reminders for hand washing, general education, other signs to help people to keep this in the forefront of their minds as they go about their day, either working or living in your communities. But I would like to say up front that this is a really complex issue. Dementia is about as complex as anything out there, and so is human relationships. And so while we will try to give you some tips and some frameworks to think through, we don't have all the answers, and no one has all the answers. Every single situation will vary based on the individuals involved. And we talk about person-centered care, we talk about individualized care, but this will really test us to go farther than we've gone before when it comes to really centering on each unique individual and very much being individualized, because this is not cookie cutter. What works for Mrs. Brown is not going to work for Mr. Jones. And so we have to really look at every case and understand the complexity of this and not try to oversimplify or water it down in any way. What should already done by now, or what should be in progress? And once again, this comes from the response plan. I'm just going to go over these at very high level. A geographic cohorting plan so that if people are affected, they can be moved preferentially to one area that can be isolated from the rest of the community. Reviewing all your building systems from ventilation to housekeeping to maintenance to passageways. How do people get from one place to another? Zoning, certain workers in certain parts of the building. Optimizing bed flexibility. Now, in the US, where I'm based, our federal government has actually said in long-term care that people should continue to move in people regularly and take people back from the hospital. I don't know what your provincial guidelines are. I would do whatever you can personally to try to keep less than 100% census, because you're going to have to move some people, and the more open beds you have, the easier that is to do. Also, converting doubles to singles will be very important for infection control. And consider other spaces, particularly in your cohorted area, that could be temporary lodging. It might be a parlor. It might be a family room. It might be some area that wasn't set up to be a bedroom, but with some modification with someone who maybe is a bit higher functioning, or maybe someone who doesn't need toilet facilities as much as others. That might be a possibility for people as well. Delivery and removal plans for supplies, for food, for waste, all those things. Creating work and service zones. Restricting visitation, which is pretty much happening, I believe, throughout Ontario right now. Instructions for vendors, keeping inventory up to date, and of course, all things that have to do with infection control. Having adequate hand sanitizer, waste disposal in the right places, personal protective equipment for those who need it. And remember, we know that there are shortages. Let's use it in the places where it's best used. Remember that masks don't particularly prevent you from catching coronavirus because it's
It looked like Al froze just a little bit. We're going to wait just a second to see if he comes back on.
Pray to the internet gods.
Yeah.
What happened, Al?
Al said this might happen. He said his internet's been getting disrupted for like 30 seconds at a time.
Oh, no.
All right. That's okay. We've got.
Hate when that happens.
We can remind him he left off with like the correct usage for PPEs, so we can just restart right there.
All right. Oh,
There he
looks
is.
like he's. Yeah.
okay. Is my screen still shared? Sorry, I told you that would happen.
There
Welcome
you go.
back.
No problem.
Where did you lose me on this slide?
The correct usages of PPEs.
Okay, we're back, way back there. Okay, it's going to be well to tell me. Okay, did you get that part or before that?
You were like in the middle of it, so maybe just start that part over to make easy editing.
Okay, sorry again, my clipboard. There we go. This also involves appropriate infection control precautions, making sure hand sanitizers and waste disposal containers are where they should be. Personal protective equipment, and remember that because this spreads primarily by droplet, which means it gets coughed or sneezed or spread by hand contact onto surfaces and then brought by your hand to your face, for those of us who are not affected, wearing a mask is not that effective. The best place to put a mask is on the person who has the infection so that they're not coughing or sneezing the droplets. Masks, of course, would also be recommended for anyone who's doing close personal or healthcare work. But for someone who's just in the building, wearing a mask is not that effective and may take needed equipment away from people that are going to be in much closer contact. And of course, a cleaning sanitation plan, particularly for the affected areas. Most places have defaulted to dining in rooms now. A few are still spreading people out, maybe 2 per table, but having people in their rooms eating is probably a reasonable precaution for most communities to be taking at this time. Certainly once it gets in the building, that seems to be a necessity. I would try to optimize people's self-sufficiency within their rooms, and this will tie into when we talk about people in with dementia. The more a room can be familiarized, comfortable, and meaningful for the person, the easier it is for them to want to be there and to engage there. And don't forget, this is going to involve some moving. So if we have to necessarily move people to different areas, what are those necessary things to move with them that will help create some continuity, some feeling of belonging and familiarity and engagement that can help them to be as satisfied where they are as possible. It means active surveillance of residents and staff. Some people are doing this daily with residents. Some have moved to every shift or a couple times a day. If you haven't gotten the community for retirement, daily surveillance may be enough. But if you are going to check daily temperatures, my medical recommendation would be to check them around 4 to 8 p.m. because that's when body temperature tends to be highest during the 24-hour day. Normally, it fluctuates that way. And if someone has got an early fever, that might be the best time to catch it before it gets too severe. So I would suggest if you can do it on the evening shift, that's a good time to check daily temperatures. Once it's in the building, I think every shift is reasonable for residents. And certainly staff members should be surveyed and checked for temperatures before they start any shift, because they are the ones that are most likely to introduce it into your organization coming in from the community. And remember that resident redistribution is likely to occur, and to really plan the best way to do that. Community-wide education is really important, and myth busting, I would suggest you go to one really trusted site like the WHO, for example, to get your information, because there's a lot of information out there that is not really up to date or true, and you want to make sure you're getting a very consistent message to people. You'd like to reduce, if you can, eliminate any outside agency staff that may be floating from one community to another, and within your own team members, minimize floating of them from one area to another, and it will become an absolute necessity if you have a cohorted area with people who are diagnosed with the virus. We need to make plans for increased staffing needs, maybe incentives for people to work extra hours or to work overtime, to look at benefits to make sure people are adequately covered, to have them willing to work, and it may mean brainstorming challenges such as transportation, childcare, etc., for individual team members. And I know Jessica let me know that there is a movement in place with some of the health organizations to have some health organization-based childcare, so that those workers who are having trouble getting their kids watched during the day or during the shift may be able to have some assistance. I'm sure Orca knows more about that. Brainstorming ways to keep people connected and working with activities professionals or other resources to engage people meaningfully. And this is something that we will be covering in much more detail during our discussion. But there are some resources in the Orca response guide which are included and which are represented by some of the people on this call. What happens when a resident becomes suspected or confirmed? Well, first of all, we need to get that person away from everybody else. Move to that cohorted area. The first person there should be put as far away from anyone else as possible until more people start moving in, and then continue moving any suspected or affected people to the area and try to keep getting unaffected people out of that area completely to temporary lodging if possible. Use dedicated or consistent care staff who are not floating to any other areas if possible, and those staff should also avoid contact with coworkers and start self-isolating both within your community and when out in the larger community as well, because they can be considered at risk for contact at this point. From a medical standpoint, I would suggest that the medical nursing pharmacy group review the med lists, and I would at least temporarily remove or suspend any non-essential meds or meds that could increase risk of confusion with medical illness. There probably is not a lot of reason for a person to take a cholesterol pill or a calcium supplement while they are acutely ill, and the truth is that the fewer times you're going in the room giving medications, the less exposure you will have, the less chance you will pass it to somebody else. So consolidate those med passes as much as you can. You can work with a pharmacist in spite of what all the med references say about how you can't take this pill with that pill, or you have to take this on an empty stomach. There are many ways you can softly bend those rules to make this a much more easy and achievable process in an emergency like this. And also look at the medications people are on for routine. Remember that this causes fever, it causes lethargy, it causes decreased intake of food and fluids. So if people are on diuretics, which may dehydrate them, if they're on diabetes or blood pressure medications, think about all the things that may need to be adjusted or temporarily held or closely monitored during the course of the acute illness. I'd like to give a few general guidelines that I think might be helpful for people who may not be able to remember to maintain precautions. This is a huge source of anxiety among operators, and for a good reason. We don't want to have unattended spread of the virus any more than necessary, but we also have to understand that there are certain things that can reasonably be expected to work and other things that really can't reasonably be expected to work. And so we have to apply some critical thinking to what we do and what we don't do. So I'd like to give some of my guidelines, and once again, some of this is informed by the guidelines out there, but some of these are also where I'm coming at here, and I'm happy to engage the other panelists to see what they think about these things too. I was on a talk from Johns Hopkins about 10 days ago, and one thing the specialist said is that even though they say, oh, it can take up to 14 days to get this, and we don't know when you're contagious, the truth is we do know. The vast majority of people are only spreading the virus from a couple days before they get sick until maybe about 5 days into their illness. Now, it is possible you might spread the virus a little early or maybe a little bit after that, but for the vast majority of people, it's within a time frame of about a week. So, and don't forget that when people are acutely ill, many of them are feeling poorly. They're not going to be up running around necessarily because they may be lying in bed with a high fever, feeling very tired and very achy. The actuality of people breaking isolation may not be quite as horrible for many people as we might imagine it could be. But what can we do for people who are suspected or who may need some additional help? Frequent reminders, signs, hand washing signs, stay in room signs. Karen has a great document which is on the response guide, and not to preempt her, but I love that she said that precautions might be more palatable to people if you present them as this is for your protection, instead of saying you're contagious, we need to protect other people. It's just easier for people to relate to that, I think. Encourage masks for any affected person who is willing to wear them. Once again, it can be presented as for their protection. Try to engage people in the room as much as possible with meaningful things that could interest them. Try to create that optimal feeling of comfort and continuity in whatever surroundings they happen to be in. Optimize identification of the room so it feels like their place. They can see it, they can find it. Make sure the area you move them to has adequate wayfinding for people with dementia, so that if they are out of the room, they can find their way back easily, because this is an unfamiliar location. And you can expect that when you move people, there will be upset, because when anybody moves, it's a bit of an upheaval. And when you live with dementia and get moved, it's even more so. Expect that this is going to happen. This is not a problem. This is something expected that we need to prepare for, and we need to provide additional accommodation. Just like you would not move somebody to a living area with a flight of stairs if they were in a wheelchair without providing some sort of a ramp or elevator. You prepare for the person's disability by making sure that the environment is optimally prepared for them before they get there. Remember that attempts to walk or exit are often expressing needs or desires. So we have to work to understand how those needs or desires can be fulfilled. It's not just behaviors caused by dementia. These are legitimate responses to a situation that's upsetting all of us. Dementia didn't cause the situation. It affected our ability to cope with it, but it's not the root cause. They have needs that everybody has, and we need to be good detectives to understand these. People have been through other illnesses and quarantines, particularly if they're older than 60 or 70. You can have conversations about quarantines, the measles epidemics or the polio epidemics and other things in the past, and discover what the person might need when she wants to leave the room. And if that can be fulfilled within the room, we can arrange for that. And also, if there are people in the general area who are not affected, they can keep their doors closed, which will keep the person from entering or spreading infection within their private space. Or something like Dutch doors or something more transparent can give you the ability to look in but not have the person entering necessarily. Remember that once two people have coronavirus, if they're near each other, it's not our primary concern. They're both sick, they're not going to catch anything. That's really not what we're worried about here. And remember, if a person is very ambulatory and hard to keep in place, I know that there's a limit to what you can do with this, but some one-to-one staffing might be required during those times when they're active to help engage them, to help direct them, to help with hand washing and hygiene as much as possible. Or maybe sort of a zone defense where you have a couple people planted at the ends of hallways, sort of picking people up as they come out and helping them out. Once again, that depends on your geography, your staffing patterns, but think about these things. People have talked about hospitalization to get affected people out of the area. I would say to hospitalize people mainly for isolation, this should be a last resort for a lot of reasons. First of all, for a person living with dementia to go to a hospital is always a horrible thing. They're exposed to very regimented schedules. It's an unfamiliar environment. They're exposed to often drugs that are dangerous, being woken up at all hours of the night, noisy, chaotic environments, and they often will be sedated and restrained, which is almost guaranteed to make them worse. Hospitalizations in this situation can be expected to have negative outcomes. Plus, you would take up a hospital bed that somebody who's sicker might need. So this really is something that we all need to consider is our responsibility. We have people who are sick at home, who are being treated at home. And so the home environment has taken up the charge, and our retirement communities also need to understand that we can't just push people off to try to keep a clean environment. We're all going to experience this, and we all have to come up with our own plan to deal with it as best as possible. A couple of final comments here before I turn it over to the panel. First of all, physical restraints are so 20th century. They are dangerous. They will increase distress. They increase the risk of injury and death. This was proven decades ago. This should not even be a consideration among any retirement or long-term care community at this point in time. Secondly, sedating drugs like antipsychotics also potentially dangerous. And to look at this, let's think about our critical thinking once again. What do these drugs do, and what do you want people to do? You want them not to leave the room. You want them not to go in other people's rooms or touch people, maintain a 2-meter distance. You want people to wash their hands. There is no drug that will make people's brain tell them to do those things. The only thing these drugs do is they sedate people. And when you sedate a person who wants to get up and walk, all you do is make them fall and injure themselves or make them more dehydrated and greatly increase the risk of dehydration, injury, and death. This is a liability issue, and you need to understand that sedating people to keep them to maintain precautions makes no sense from a medical standpoint. So having said that, I'd like to turn it over and facilitate a conversation with Kyrié Carpenter, who is a dementia coach and also is the managing editor for changingaging.org, which is a great place to reframe our views of aging and dementia. We have Brian LaBlanc, who is an advocate from Florida, who is living with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, is an international speaker and advocate for the well-being and rights of people living with a diagnosis of dementia. And Karen Stobbe, who has a theater background, is an engagement expert, co-founded In the Moment, which explains creative ways to communicate with, understand, and support people who live with changing cognition. So I'm going to turn the screen back over to Trina, and we'll facilitate a discussion with everybody and see what other ideas come up as a result of this discussion.
Well, I think we should hear from Brian. I saw you taking notes as Al was talking, and I'd love to hear what you have to say, Brian.
Well, what I did prior to our webinar here, I made a list of, and this might be a list of things that are already being done, but you know, I'm still living at home. I have a care partner, Maureen, and she does extremely well with me. And we're also life partners, so that helps. But I'm not in a care community. But I thought, if I was, what would I want during this time? I know that this would create a lot of anxiousness for a lot of folks. So I was thinking at dinner time or lunchtime or even breakfast time, I know you have to do the social distancing, but how about having the residents being able to sit in their doorway and have the meals delivered to their, to their door, but they can see the person across the hall from them, or see the person 2 doors down from them, or right next door to them. It would give them a little bit more social ability, but still keeping the social distancing so that they could still interact with one another. Ask the residents what they want to do. And I know there could be things that they're going to ask to do, but can't because of the social distancing. But say, for instance, if they want to just ask them for suggestions, give them, give them options of what they can and what they can't do, but let them be part of the planning, because that gives them ownership and makes them feel like they're making their own decision, which, you know, the ones that are still able to do so, that gives them comfort, that gives them a little bit of non-anxiousness, if you want to put it that way. Make sure that they are informed of what's happening, but then again, not anything to cause anxiousness. And I know that's kind of a slippery slope there. I mean, I get anxious a lot, and it comes on without any notice sometimes. It just it takes over. And ever since this whole thing started, there are points in, I'm trying not to watch the news, because everything is the coronavirus. And I'm so tired of hearing about the coronavirus. I want to hear other stuff. So I tend to go online and find things that interest me, that will take my attention away from what's happening, but I still, you know, hear the alerts, and I still keep up with it just in case there's something that I need to do. Some of the residents may be in the same position to where they can realize what's going on, but also take ownership of themselves to keep themselves in a non-anxious position. Now, Maureen is the one that gave me this suggestion, is that right now, you know, I'm pretty sure Canada is going through the same stuff that we are going through in the States, that children are out of school, okay? Elementary school, middle school, high school, college. How would it work if those students could be contacted and ask if they would be willing to be a pen pal for a resident? And then you can match up a student with a resident, and you can do that for as many as you possibly can. That way, they are conversing. They are making a new connection. And who knows what would happen after all this is over. Finally get to meet, you know? And so that kind of brought a big smile to my face, because if I was in their position, which I'm going to be one day, that's what I would want. I would want someone to be able to talk to me, whether it's through writing or through a video conference, a FaceTime, Skype, whatever. And that brings me to video messaging. If the residents, I'm not sure if they have phones or if they have an iPad or anything, that they can keep in touch with their loved ones. Their loved ones can't come see them right now. And so they're feeling this loneliness, and there again, the anxiousness. I mean, I get anxious sometimes when Maureen has to leave the apartment to go somewhere. And if she's gone for like an hour or more, I start getting anxious. Like, when is she coming back? What's going on? So I can just imagine what's happening with some of these folks, that all of a sudden they're used to having their families come to visit them, and now they're not. What happens to them? What happens at that point? So if there's an opportunity to have video messaging So where they can still see their loved ones, they can still have that two-way communication. That's going to take away a lot of the anxiousness. And she also brought up another point about having the residents helping the staff with things. You know, I know that, you know, you have to keep the social distancing, and that could be a kind of an issue, but to give them something to do that's meaningful. She told me a story about how a lady who was in a community care, care community, sorry, that she volunteered to help a company stuff envelopes. And she stuffed envelopes for a couple of hours a day. But it gave her such a sense of purpose. And that purpose helped her. It helped her feel so good about herself because she used before going to the care community, she was a secretary. So that just became part of what she knew already. So, and then lastly, this goes back to the video messaging. Read to children. What if the person in the care community has the ability to read and can read out loud to someone? So why not read to children? And there again, after all this is over, how cool would it be if all the children that they read to would go to the care community and actually meet that person and keep the reading program alive? It could happen. So those are my suggestions of what could happen. I know there are a lot of restrictions, especially with the social distancing. But the things that you can do, I feel, far outweigh the social distancing. That can still happen, but still giving the individuals something to do that makes them feel like they can take ownership and gives them some self-fulfillment. And also, there again, cut down on that anxiousness, because that can get pretty bad sometimes. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thanks so much, Brian. Who'd like to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
I do have it on. Thanks, Brian. Those were just great. I had to write them down and to make sure I share those. But I think I'm going to touch on a couple other areas that I think that the whole idea of knowing the person is really going to come into play during this time. And that if your community hasn't ever used kind of a get to know you sheet or an about me sheet, I'll attach one and have Jessica send it out, that this is a good time for that. That if you have something, to go take time to look at it, because there's a lot of good information on those sheets that can help you with some one-on-one activities. And I think that's where we're going to get to. I mean, I think that I'm hearing of places in the States that are literally locking people with dementia in their rooms and bringing them food, but not letting them go out because they're too scared. But if you think about the fact that you've already created this family atmosphere, right? You already live together as a family, and you have already done, if you've been doing person-centered care, then you've been hugging and you hold hands and all this. They're not going to stop this, of course, in one day. So I think we're going to end up having to slowly go to some one-on-one. And I think it's this all hands on deck. I think it's time that you know, the folks that are in the office, the administrative staff, the receptionists, the chaplains can do, you know, one-on-one. We can all help with that one-on-one, whether it is reading to someone that may not longer have any, has good eyesight, I've got a pretty good list that I've worked on this morning, but it goes back to, if you came in my room and I was your resident and you had a book on the Civil War, I'd be like, okay, thanks. And I'd probably politely take it from you and then throw it on the floor when you left the room, because I don't care about the Civil War. But if you brought this cooking book with beautiful pictures and I could go through it and look at it by myself while sitting by my window, I would love that. So you have to know, I think it's going to go back to the baseline of good care is relationship and knowing that person. So if you don't have like an about me sheet in place type thing, then maybe this is a good time to start filling them out, to where you can sit with that person and ask them some questions, and even email the families and ask them questions and fill them out. And this can happen, the receptionist can do this, a chaplain, the bookkeeper, this could be anybody. And I think that we're going to get more and more to this one-on-one. You're going to stop people with dementia from giving you a hug. What you're going to have to do is turn your head the other way, go wash your hands, and be aware that you're going to have to take care of yourself and change your clothes before you go home and everything else. But you've taught them to give hugs. You've taught them to hold hands. And this is now what they love to do with you because you've been a loving community. So I think that that's my main thing I want to say. I have a big list, but I think the other piece of that puzzle is to take care of yourself too. That we say that about family caregivers all the time, but we don't really talk about that with care community staff. And I think that, you know, there's some easy tips of parking as far away as you can in your parking lot. And when you leave the building, let it go. Take that breath and breathe and walk slowly to your car so you're ready when you get home for whomever is there for you, whether it's family or it's your fur babies, whomever it is, so that you can just let that go and then step into your life and your day. Maybe it's having some good, and I know it might sound a little goofy, but I found that it even helps me. They're all over my office. Is having some good self-talk, whether it's quotes or that you like, or just, you know, that you're awesome, that you need to be kind to yourself. No one has ever done what you're doing before. This work, this moment, it's okay, and that you're making a difference in people's lives. And that even if you can't hear it, there are people around the world cheering you on. And I think that's sometimes hard to remember when you feel so isolated and alone, especially if you're going home alone to a house by yourself or an apartment. So don't forget to take care of yourself too. And I think last but not least, since I've been a family member and both of my parents had Alzheimer's, I think that's such an important point that Brian made about connecting. And I think that family members were so stressed out, it might be you that needs to reach out to them to say, hey, if you can't come by, if you don't know how to do FaceTime or anything else, how about an email message? How about slipping a note into the door? How about a picture from the grandchild? You know, talking them through. But almost all of our communities these days has an IT person. And so whether it's an IT person or a person that's super comfortable with technology, you know, maybe they can reach out to the families and be that point person for helping families to connect and go around with the phone or the laptop and the iPad to connect the families, the residents with their families. So I think that, you know, Brian said we can do this. It's about change. It's about us making change to benefit everybody. So I'll make sure that I connect this list, that it can go out with this recording too. But thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. Thanks for adding those great thoughts. Kyrié, what would you like to add?
Yeah, no, and Karen, I'm so glad you mentioned, the professional care partners there, because that's definitely, as we were talking about all of this, that was where my heart was going to. I know I've been, I work with a home care company, and all the care partners there I've been talking to, there's a lot of fear around this on their part too. And so recognizing where this experience is universal for both, the folks that live there and all the different staff too. We're all watching, as Brian said, the news that's so scary right now. There's so much, as Al said, misinformation out there. And so I was really just thinking about, how coming up with creative ways to make sure that you're getting the information that's true from the WHO to your care partners, so they know here's how to stay safe, here's what we're doing to protect you, here's the myth busting. And also just having a place for that fear, whether that's a process group where you have folks who live there that are interested in attending, and care partners too, to be able to say this is scary, this is hard, here's what I'm doing to make it okay. Just finding that community and what's called universality, knowing that you're not the only one feeling that way, is one of the most psychologically relieving things for those sort of anxieties. So helping foster that connection, that we are all in this together, because that is the beautiful silver lining of this, is us all being in together. I know I've been finding a lot of that. Eden Alternative has been doing weekly calls, which is in Pioneer's list of resources that I know is in the Schlegel resources. So, and they're going to be extending those through April, and I found them so anxiety reducing, hearing what everyone else is doing, and really lots of great ideas about, everything we've been saying. But I was really thinking about that fear, and then thinking if we can help the care partners to not feel as much fear, then our super intuitive elders aren't going to be picking up on all that fear, and it'll be a nice virtuous circle of we can all help calm each other, and thinking too about just the other thing I was thinking about, the talk around why you can't go outside. I love the examples of, there've been, epidemics before, and some of the best, talk track around it that I heard was just really calmly, not trying to say nothing is wrong and not trying to terrify, but just stay in that middle of calmly, there's a new bug out there, and we're doing everything we can to figure out, how to fix it. But right now we don't know. And so the best thing we can do is wash our hands and stay at home, and it's going to be okay. And at some point it'll be different, but right now this is what we have to do. And just, believing that yourself too. That was something I really, and just recognizing the universal needs. We all want to be able to go out. I know I'm in San Francisco, where we are under shelter in place, and in my house, we've created signs of our favorite places that we can't go to anymore. So I do yoga under the logo of my yoga studio with my teacher, just to try to create some sense of my normalcy and routine, and so just getting again to that universality of we're all going through this. It's going to be even harder for folks living with dementia, but we don't need to be the heroes. We can all be in this together, the sort of wounded healers, if you will. And just really, the last thing I had was making use of everything that's out there now online. So again, those IT persons, so many museums are putting up virtual ways to be in the museum. Universal's released all of their new movies online for streaming that we're going to be in theaters. All sorts of stuff is pouring out online. So to the extent that you can, getting that, and then obviously echoing everything all of these people said before. I'm so happy to be on the call with you all. And Karen's list of stuff is great. I've been sending that to everyone. Karen here. Yeah.
Thanks.
Those are my thoughts.
Just to second a couple of those things. There are hyperlinks in the ORCA response guide to the in the moment information, to the Pioneer Network. Also, the Dementia Action Alliance has a list of great online resources, such as the virtual museums and concert halls and those types of things. If I can second what Kyrié said about body language and nonverbal communication, it usually says more than our words, and it is so contagious. And so really that ties into what Karen said about self-care. If we take care of ourselves, if we can find that peace within ourselves, we have a much better chance of not transmitting our anxiety to the people that we are trying to help to feel calm during these very difficult times. I also want to re-emphasize what Karen said about this is not perfect. It's not a perfect world. We're not going to create a hermetically sealed, aseptic environment. We have been, we are people. We are in relationship. You know, I've had my son's family cohorting with us up here, and which includes a 20-month-old. You know, and I think, well, you know, we're doing the best we can, but you know, if he touches something, we're all dead because you know, there's just no way you stay away from this guy. You know, so I think we have to understand it is okay to make mistakes. It is okay to be imperfect because this is a very imperfect world, and I know that's scary, and I know you feel like, you know, regulators and people are looking over your shoulder at everything you do. But I think it's really important to understand that we're human and we're doing the best we can in trying times that no one has seen literally for a century, anything like this. And even then, it was arguably maybe a bit more contagious, but certainly not as deadly as what we're dealing with now. And in many ways, because of globalization, the contagion is more just because we move more than we did a century ago. We got people getting on planes. We got people all over the place going out in their cars, going to the store. And so it's a very different thing. It's something that we have not been tested on before. And so everybody just needs to be really, really extremely creative. We had asked gerontologist Sonia Barsness to be on the call too, and she was unable to make it because of a conflict. But she sent some ideas. Some of these have been covered, but I just thought I would also mention a couple of her comments. One of them is that if you're helping somebody use hand sanitizer, you can add that extra special touch by making it both a hand washing and a hand massage. So once again, doing what Karen says about reframing how we are close to each other in ways that are pro-health. So not just washing hands, but doing a hand massage as part of it.
Read the dog one.
What's that?
Read the dog one.
Yeah. Oh, the dog one. Yes. Okay. I have to go down and find it. Oh, yeah. Have people bring their dogs for walks around the building. So in other words, engaging people and looking out the window. And I'll tell you, my mother lives in a retirement community here in Rochester, and they've been keeping everybody out. And so when my grandson came to town, we all walked up there. It's about a mile away, and we just went outside a window, and we just visited. We talked through the window. And my daughter, who works in the emergency room, does that. She'll come over a couple times a week, and she'll come to the front door, and we'll just open the front door with our glass, storm door, and we'll just talk through the window. We'll, hold our breath and pass her a care package or something that came in the mail for her. But it's, there are those ways to keep contact face to face and help engage people, even though they may not be able to go outside or may not be able to be close to people. So lots of great ideas. I just want to open it back up, Karen, Kyrié. Other things you'd like to add to this discussion before we close it up?
I was just thinking that, we've talked a lot about in culture change that overhead pagers are not helpful and a lot of people to get rid, but we know a lot of care communities still have overhead pagers. Well, I think this is the time you could bring them out and use them. Why not tell silly jokes over them or start a sing-along? So if people are in their rooms or 6 feet apart, you could at least use your overhead pager to engage everybody in the entire building. So yeah. Otherwise, don't use it. But if you are going to use it for some engagement. Use it for some good purposes. I was just also thinking about how I think that people with dementia can do more than you sometimes think they can do. So try it. Even if you think, oh, they can't, just give it a try. Just see, because I just was always amazed at when we would try something with my mom, even into 15 and 16 years of her living with dementia, that she was still able to do it. We just would have to adapt it. And personalizing these one-on-ones, I think, is really important. I included this link that you can make your own word searches or your own crossword puzzles, and you can put all this information about the person in it. So it's fun for them to find their own name. I did them, and I just put my mom's name in there like 18 times, and she loved just finding her own name over and over and over and over. So find ways to get to know, if you don't know your residents, here's the time. Get to know them. And please, please, there's no reason for locked doors. There's no reason for medications like Al said. There's no reason for any of that. Please, if you're seeing them have a new action, think about the why behind it. What's going on with this person right now? Why are they acting this way? Or perhaps maybe they're just reacting to you because of something that just happened. So please, and also know how good of a job you're doing and how so many of us are in awe because we could not do it, and that we applaud you and we're thankful for you. And so I think that as a family member, I thank all of you of the job you're doing. It's so great.
I second that. And Karen, you reminded me of a wonderful moment of irony I had a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's just worth reinforcing these things that we talk about being behaviors. And that is, I attended the webinar. There was information about how coronavirus affects people with dementia and their care partners. And this is not to pick on the presenter, because I think the majority of experts who presented would have done the same thing. But the presenter said that people with dementia will have certain BPSD, certain behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, and included anxiety, irritability, and agitation. And then later on, said that the approach was behavior management, okay? Well, almost in the same breath, there was a slide for care partners that said care partners would experience certain psychological stresses like anxiety, irritability, and agitation, and for them, they needed psychosocial support. So here are two groups of people having the same response to a real situation, and they had framed them totally different, as if they were different people. Label of dementia, making them think in a different way.
That's the other thing is that, you know, Brian was talking about as a person living with dementia about how he's having anxiety. Well, it's no different. And we are no different than persons living with dementia. And we have to remember that. The more that we apply normalcy to the situation, the more we can see and understand what they're going through. Because we all would feel the same way if we were in a locked place and people told us we couldn't go, and things keep changing every day now that we can't do this and we can't do. It's the same thing. We all feel this anxiety. We all need to look at persons with dementia as the same as how are we treating our loved ones here in my own home. And so I think the more we do that, the more we can understand. So thank you.
Kyrié, any other comments?
Yeah, I mean, echoing everything. But yeah, also just thinking about how much we can do, and I'm thinking about, you know, like what alleviates my own anxiety is just even feeling like you're doing something. How, like, in these times, we all want to, you know, we want to feel like we're doing something to help. And so thinking about what you can do, you know, maybe activities turn into like helping clean the counters and, you know, clean stuff up. And maybe it's, you know, after it's already been done, but it's just extra measures, you know. And I loved to, I think it was Karen that said to, like, everyone needs to jump on board. I know my sister-in-law is a physical therapist who works with vestibular stuff, and so her clinic is closed, and she started this week working as a janitor in the hospital system she works for, and she's going around and doing extra sanitization. And she said, you know, like, a lot of other folks she works with have, you know, she's more able than other folks she works with. Maybe they're older, they have kids, et cetera. And she's like, but she wanted to jump in and help. And so I think re-echoing, let's all jump in and help where we can. And that includes the people who live in these communities too, who are going to, it feels so good to help. And then I just had a question for Karen too, because I know with anything with this stuff, I always love referring people to your, you know, improv plus dementia. It's such a good framework to get out of doing too, and being with and responding. And I just feel like if any moment called for some improv, this is definitely unexpected, and it's uncharted territory. So I didn't know if from that framework, if you had any like words of wisdom. I know I want to hear them, and I'm assuming the folks listening will too.
Are you talking just about the rules of improv and how we apply them, or just?
Yeah, it's like, I guess, like, in this time, yeah, where have you found comfort in improv? Like, what part of improv has been most helpful, you know, for you in this, like, because this is such a, like, you're getting, you know, we're all getting thrown something totally brand new that we're having to respond to.
My background is in improvisation, because I thought I wanted to be a great actor, but then realized I couldn't memorize. So went to improv and still perform it. And actually our group that perform once a month here, our small little 5-person group, we're trying to figure out how to do it online. So we're actually going to have a show online this Friday. And but I think that there's this improv, to me, there's so much that reflects good care and being a good, giving good care, in the sense of going with the flow and stepping into the person's world. And one that we don't talk about a lot, but I love, is I love starting a scene and not speaking and just having the audience figure out what's going on and that they slowly get it. And to me, that embodies the guideline of silence can be powerful. And I think that we all forget about that guideline a lot, in the sense of just being in this time and sitting and holding someone's hand, whether you have a glove on or not, but just being with another human being and looking out the window or patting their hand or humming. But we forget about that silence and how good it is for us, and that we don't have to always be going in activities and worrying about this and that. And sometimes it's just good to sit. And I saw this really beautiful picture of looked like a CNA or a direct care worker that had put a chair in the hallway, and on each side she was holding hands with two residents across, because they wanted to hold hands, she said. So she was the conduit,
Cool.
so they could hold hands. And I just thought, gosh, that's it. And the three of them just sitting there, and they all had their heads down and closing their eyes. And I thought, they're just being together. And how important that is for us as humans. It's just sometimes to just be.
That is beautiful. And it's such an important thing. Like you say, I think people just tend to say, okay, I have to fill their day with an activity calendar. And it doesn't have to be do this and that. You remind me that one other resource we should mention is Time Slips, created by Ann Basting. And she has opened up a lot of her website for free engagement during this time. And I was on a webinar with her a couple of weeks ago talking about what could be done. And Karen talks about one of the basic rules of improv is yes and. You never stop the flow. You always say whatever somebody does or says, you say yes, and here's where we'll go with it. And I remember Ann saying, when you feel oppressed by these new regulations and rules, say yes and. Yes, we have to maintain social distancing, and here's how we'll do it. And your picture of the woman holding hands across the hall is just the perfect example of yes and. Last thing I want to see is that someone will take us to task for not mentioning something like music, for instance, which is so powerful. We've given some allusions to it. And there are a lot of proprietary things out there that engage people in different ways, music and otherwise. And they're all useful. This is not to promote one kind of engagement, but to say they're all important. And as Karen said, it's about the individual, it's about relationships and knowing the person. So personalized music might be perfect for one person. It might not engage another person. There's no one rule, but you have all these tools at your disposal. You have all these resources. So you have a list of things that you can try when you talk about who the person is, what she likes, what she needs, what she's expressing. Then you can start to customize a care plan. And this is really an engagement plan for every single individual. And that engagement is an important part of their medical and nursing care. It's a critical part during these times of contagion, I think. Last words, anybody? I think we've probably come to our hour and need to wrap up.
I do. I have a last word. Joy. Joy. Let's not forget joy. Let's just, it's really hard when we're stressed out and we're trying to remember, oh my gosh, did I wash my hands? Did I not wash my hands? Where's my gloves? Where's this? Oh my gosh. But the more that you can have joy in your community, the more you're going to see people relaxing and being able to go with the flow of all this, but find ways to bring joy. So joy, that's my last word.
Thank you, everybody. I hope this has been helpful. And don't hesitate to contact Orca if you have any further questions. Thanks again for being part of this.
Thank you.